2 a.m. A soft noise outside, near the fence line. You grab your phone, flick on the flashlight, and catch a shape sliding along the wall. Low body, a long bald tail, a walk that looks half drunk and half calculated. 3 seconds later, it's gone behind the trash cans. Your first reaction was probably disgust, maybe fear. But while you went back to sleep, that animal kept working in your yard all night long, and its work is worth more, in practical terms, than several things you pay for every month without a second thought. Pest control, and maybe even a slice of what an insurer would owe if someone in your house got bitten by a venomous snake. You've probably absorbed the unspoken version of this animal's reputation. Dirty, disease-ridden, something to chase off with a broom or worse. That story gets passed from neighbor to neighbor for generations, and it's wrong in almost every detail. Before taking it apart piece by piece, it helps to know where even the name comes from. Opossum comes from the Powhatan word apossum, meaning roughly white dog or white animal, a name early English colonists picked up from Algonquian-speaking communities in Virginia around 1610. In Brazil, where the same animal family goes by gamba, the name traces back to tupi, gamba, literally hollow breast, a direct nod to the pouch where females carry newborns the size of a bean. After a pregnancy that lasts under 2 weeks, one of the shortest gestation periods of any mammal on Earth, both names, an ocean apart, point at the same fact hiding in plain sight. This is a marsupial, part of a lineage that split off from placental mammals tens of millions of years ago, long before almost anything else sharing your neighborhood existed in its current form. Start with a trait that explains almost everything else. An opossum runs cooler than most mammals. Not cold-blooded. It's still warm-bodied, like you, but its internal temperature typically sits lower than most placental mammals, somewhere between 34 degrees Celsius and 36 degrees Celsius, 93 to 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Against the 36 to 38 degrees Celsius, most dogs, cats, and humans hold steady. A couple of degrees doesn't sound like much, but the rabies virus needs a warmer environment to replicate efficiently, and that gap functions almost like a physical barrier built into the animal's own body. Researchers floated this idea back in the 1960s, and for decades confirmed rabies cases in opossums stayed remarkably rare, which reinforced the idea of a naturally shielded animal. Science, though, doesn't let old hypotheses rest untested forever. In 2021, a white-eared opossum was found dead in a park in Campinas, Brazil. It was one of 22 opossums tested that year, the only one that came back positive for rabies. Researchers from the Adolfo Lutz Institute and the University of São Paulo confirmed the case and published it in the journal Emerging Infectious Diseases. That doesn't erase the natural resistance. It clarifies it. Resistant isn't the same as immune. The opossum's body puts up a real obstacle to the virus. It just isn't an ironclad guarantee, and rare cases like this one exist precisely to remind us of that. You've probably seen the claim in some video that a single opossum eats thousands of ticks in a season. That number gets repeated so often, it has basically become scientific folklore, and it's worth pausing on. It traces back to a 2009 study that placed ticks on just 4 caged opossums and watched them for 4 days. Researchers noticed very few ticks left on the animals afterward and extrapolated backward, estimating the opossums must have groomed off somewhere between 83% and 96% of the parasites. In 2021, a different research team dissected the stomachs of more than 30 wild opossums and found 0 ticks inside. And when they reviewed 23 earlier diet studies covering over 1,200 animals, not one recorded a tick in an opossum's stomach either. So the honest version is a little less dramatic, and in its own way still interesting. Opossums are almost obsessively clean, grooming themselves constantly, and they genuinely carry noticeably lighter tick loads than other animals sharing the same habitat. The more accurate way to describe what's happening is that grooming kills ticks before they can feed long enough to transmit disease, rather than the animal actively hunting and devouring thousands of them as food. It's also worth flagging that this specific research is on the North American Virginia opossum. Brazil's gamba hasn't been studied quite as closely on this point, but it belongs to the same genus and shows the same fastidious grooming habit. Hold on to that idea of a biological obstacle because it's about to get more impressive. Opossum blood contains 2 proteins identified by researchers at the Oswaldo Cruz Institute, part of Brazil's Fiocruz, named DM43 and DM64. DM43 neutralizes the metalloproteases in snake venom, the enzymes behind severe hemorrhaging from a bite. DM64 acts on phospholipids, the toxins that destroy muscle tissue. In lab tests on mice and rabbits, the 2 proteins together neutralized venom from species like the jararaca, a lancehead pit viper responsible for most snake bites in Brazil, about as effectively as, and in some scenarios more effectively than, standard antivenom. Researchers have already cloned the DNA behind these molecules because the goal was never to bleed opossums for medicine. It's to reproduce the protein in a lab, and the potential reach doesn't stop at snake bites. The same enzyme families these proteins block are also involved in certain cancers and in osteoarthritis, which has opened research directions that go well beyond antivenom. Put the three pieces together: an animal whose own body makes it hard for one of the deadliest viruses on Earth to take hold, an animal that keeps tick loads down just by existing nearby and grooming constantly, an animal whose blood is being studied, right now, in Brazilian labs, as raw material for medicine that saves people bitten by venomous snakes. None of that fits gross animal you should chase off. It fits a small, wandering lab that happens to walk through your yard exactly when you're not looking. So why is its reputation so bad? Most of the answer sits in its defensive behavior, which gets misread constantly. When cornered, an opossum may hiss, growl, bear a mouth of roughly 50 teeth, more than almost any other land mammal on the continent, and release a strong odor from glands near the tail. It looks vicious. It's the opposite, a small animal trying to look big enough that something larger decides it's not worth the trouble. And if the bluff doesn't work, it has one more move, one of the most studied behaviors in animal biology: thanatosis, or playing dead. It's not a choice. It's an involuntary reflex. The body goes rigid, breathing slows, the tongue may loll out, and sometimes a foul-smelling fluid leaks from glands near the tail, mimicking not just the look, but the smell of a rotting carcass. It can stay like that for minutes, occasionally over an hour, until the threat loses interest and leaves. An animal that fakes its own death, smell included, to survive isn't an aggressive animal. It's an animal playing its very last card. There's one more role that almost never comes up. Opossums eat a lot of fruit, move across multiple points of their territory in a single night, and leave viable seeds behind at every stop. In urban green patches and forest fragments, where the larger animals that used to disperse seeds have disappeared, the opossum has become one of the few active agents still helping native vegetation regenerate on its own. Worth untangling one more common mix-up. The cartoon animal that fires a stinking spray at a distance when startled isn't an opossum. That's a skunk, a carnivore related to weasels, not a marsupial at all. In Brazil specifically, people often confuse the opossum with the hog-nosed skunk, Jararatica, found mostly in the northeast and the Cerrado savanna. What's walking your fence at night, genus Didelphis, might release a strong smell under threat, but it doesn't have that long-range spray mechanism. Mixing the two just lends the opossum a reputation that belongs to a completely different animal. So what should you do if an opossum is hanging around your place? First, don't kill it. In Brazil, it's a protected native species under federal wildlife law. In much of the US and Canada, it's protected or simply illegal to kill without cause too, and doing so removes a free biological pest controller. Second, you don't need a war. Opossums typically occupy a den or area for a limited stretch, often just a few months, before moving on to another part of their territory on their own. Third, what actually helps: keep trash sealed, don't leave pet food out overnight, and clear fallen fruit off the ground regularly. That doesn't forcibly evict the animal, it just makes the yard a little less inviting, without turning it into a campaign. If you find a lone baby or a clearly injured animal, the right move isn't to adopt it or handle it yourself. It's calling your local wildlife agency or a wildlife rehabilitation center. It's worth understanding why these encounters keep increasing. The opossum is a synanthropic species, a term for animals that adapt well to living near humans, taking advantage of food scraps, roof spaces, and yards as temporary shelter. That doesn't mean it depends on you. It means that as cities keep expanding into wildland, the opossum learned to survive right on the border between the two worlds, exactly where your house happens to sit. The encounter isn't an invasion. It's the city pressing up against territory that was already its own. There's an irony sitting at the center of this whole story. The very behavior that scares you, the hiss, the smell, the fake death, is exactly what proves it's trying to avoid conflict with you, the one predator that actually poses a threat to it. So next time you hear that quiet noise near the fence at 2 a.m., it means something different now. It's not a strange animal invading your yard. It's a survivor of a lineage tens of millions of years old, moving quietly through your property, cutting down parasites, staying clear of snakes, carrying in its own blood a clue that scientists are still decoding, asking for nothing in return except to be left alone.